brought to my attention this morning. Really a concerning development, I think, on a story that is already concerning at face value, having to deal with the FBI letting illegals into this country just to sort of have a pretext for, sounds like I'm talking about January 6th, but certain narratives. Can you walk us through the developments? Just walk us through this story.
Sure, Ken, and thanks for having me on. So the FBI was very happy and glad to put out a press release that they had arrested this Pakistani national for attempting to assassinate public officials, and parenthetically implying that it was going to be Donald Trump. But actually reading through the affidavit and some of the reporting that's gone on, it's pretty clear that they, one, ran the playbook, which is identify a vulnerable person and then use undercovers and informants to encourage them to do something that they are not predisposed to do, and agreed to engage in some sort of terrorist activity or act of violence. And then once that entrapment is complete, then arrest them and take credit for it. But the extra wrinkle today on this case from the Pakistani is that the FBI actually facilitated his travel from Pakistan to the United States and then sponsored him coming across with Customs and Border Patrol and said that he was a significant public benefit, essentially trying to set the narrative that they were investigating him before, and that once he came into our shores, then they would arrest him. But what wound up happening from reading the affidavit is they let him roam free for 3 months and then proceeded to build this case. And looking at the case, this was not a sophisticated person. He had these illusions of grandeur, like he was going to assemble a cohort of 25 people and have all of these rallies as cover while they were doing reconnaissance, and they were going to steal sensitive documents. And all the time, this guy doesn't have the wherewithal to do operational security, where he has people put their phones in a drawer thinking that that's going to be some sort of secure way to communicate in private. And he doesn't have funding. So all this is sort of indicating to me that the playbook is well and alive, but the extra wrinkle is now that the FBI is willing to import terrorism and put the public at risk. And it just reminded me a lot of the Fast and the Furious scandal that we had a decade and a half ago, where the government allowed guns to walk, knowing that they were being straw purchased, so that when they were inevitably used in a crime of violence, the government could get credit for seizing those guns back. And this is very much the same, except the consequences could be far greater.
And Steve, when you're going through this, again, I think it brings up the age-old question that we always try to answer here in the War Room, which is this a result, of intentional malice, or is it incompetence? And I think you can kind of see that through line even to the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump's life. I'm just curious, your thoughts. Again, you, of course, were one of the leading FBI whistleblowers. But do you think that this is an agency that is plagued, by DEI hires and just bad ideas and poor policy? Or is there something, we had Darren Beatty on in the 5 p.m. hour talking about the whole pipe bomb hoax. Is there something more sinister going on?
I think it's a combination of both. It's not if or it's and also. The FBI has a tremendous problem with the employees that they bring in. They're definitely all in on the DEI. They're definitely all in on the 30 by 30 initiative, which essentially is doing things like talking down the need to have physical fitness or job knowledge tests. But there is the other element to this, where it is on purpose as far as this type of case goes with this Pakistani national. Because the FBI has a quota system, it's called integrated program management. There is incentive to create these cases because they want to get the check marks. They want to be in the gold, not just the green and the red. And yes, there are color schemes for this. And then finally, it's being pushed by the senior executives because their compensation is tied to hitting these quotas. And there's a tremendous demand politically for terrorism in this country. And we're very blessed to live in a relatively safe country where the terrorist threat is not what the FBI implies that it actually is. They're doing that to justify their existence as a bureaucracy, which is why they've also evolved the mission of national security from being the sentry on the wall to homegrown violent extremism, domestic violent extremism, and now the latest is agave, anti-government, anti-authority violent extremism, which the FBI has defined as someone with a perception of government overreach or negligence.
So the FBI and CISA put out a joint press release, which I would say is a very concerning development there. Those are two of probably the most rogue actors, but saying that, hey, ahead of the election, there may be some cybersecurity attacks and DDoS attacks, but by the power invested in us by the American people, we certainly guarantee that it's not going to affect the results of the election. It's not going to have any impact on your vote. What do you say to their sort of what I think is this beginning surge of a narrative developing that, cybersecurity ahead of the 2024 election is something that is weak, of course, on the heels of the CrowdStrike attack happening? Where do you think they're going kind of narrative based when it comes to election security?
Well, I've been concerned about this for a long time. I think that the FBI is more likely than not to put out some sort of public service announcement and say, look, we're really concerned about polling locations because of a heightened terrorist threat or a heightened threat from Russia. And we're going to suggest that we move and transition entirely to mail-in ballots, especially in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Arizona. That's always been sort of the cautionary warning that I've been giving out there. But they're definitely setting this narrative. And they're also obfuscating from the fact that the FBI's election crimes is not investigating what the people believe that they are. The FBI is not investigating election fraud. That is very clear. There were discussions between the DOJ and the FBI across the entire field offices across the entire country that I have moles that have told me about. They are not looking at voter fraud. They're only going to be willing to look at voter intimidation. So they give this sort of broad brush and say, we investigate election crime, and you kind of assign to it what you assume that they mean by that. The FBI is not looking into the sort of fake ballots. They're only saying, well, there could be threats to poll workers, or there could be a voter intimidation scheme. And they're hyping up what they're doing in that regard to imply that they're actually on top of things. But they're really not policing what I think most Americans are very concerned about, and that is that there might be some nefarious things going on with the actual election and the tampering of the ballots.
And Steve, if people want to follow you, get the show, stay up to date with your kind of inside baseball analysis, we thank you for your service in the FBI. I don't know how you made it out. I'm sure they wish you hadn't. Like I said, you're one of the leading voices, leading whistleblowers. What was it, about a year ago? I'm sure time has flown by for you. If people want to follow you, support you, where can they go to do all that?
I'm on social media at X, at Real Steve Friend is my handle. And you can follow the American Radicals podcast, which is on rumble.com/amradpod. And then always follow the Center for Renewing America, where I'm a senior fellow. All the great work we're doing there at americarenewing.com.
Steve Friend, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.